Today I'm speaking with Dorothy Husen. Dorothy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Tim. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad we got a chance to finally connect. We've been trying to do this for a few weeks now, and I did want to give a brief bio for Dorothy. And I don't know too much about you, so this is going to be brief, but I'm looking forward to hearing your story. Dorothy is from Riverside, California, or at least that's where you are now. Are you originally from California?
I grew up in Southern California, born in Hawaii, but grew up here in Southern California.
Wow, we're in Hawaii. I'm a little jealous. Do you ever get to go back there and visit?
Went back once with my husband when we were married for our honeymoon.
Very nice, very nice.
Yeah.
And I also know you're a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as the author of a book called Breaking the Chains of Transgenerational Trauma, which I'm sure we'll touch on quite a bit in this interview. And I apologize for diverting my eyes here. I'm just looking at some notes here. I know you're also working on a second book called Reparenting Yourself, which I think we'll touch on some of those topics too. And you have an online course that teaches parents how to meet their children's emotional needs and how to apply those principles to yourself as the adult, as the parent. I know you're in the Navy. What was that like, by the way?
It was okay. I met my husband there. It was a time that I was really floundering, didn't know what I wanted to do, or I was pretty lost, and so I joined the Navy
Hmm.
and
What,
ended up 4 years and got married and got out.
mhm. What parts of the world did you get to travel to in the Navy?
I was stationed in Charleston, South Carolina. I was stationed on a submarine tender, which is a big supply ship for a submarine squadron. So I was in Charleston, and then we just traveled up to Annapolis. We traveled to the Virgin Islands, down to Orlando, along the coast. Mostly we stayed in port because
Mhm.
our job as the tender was to service the submarines. When they came in, we took care of the submarines. So
Very
we
cool.
didn't go out much. We weren't out at sea much.
When you got a chance to get on the submarines and do your work there, what did it feel like something you could do to actually live in a submarine for a while? I've always thought I'd be too claustrophobic or whatever for that life. Could you do it?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Very claustrophobic. It's really tight and dark, but the guys, and I think women are actually on submarines now. Back when I was in the Navy, it was in the 80s, and the only place women were allowed were on tenders.
Mhm.
But I think they're almost everywhere now, allowed even on submarines. If I don't know. I might be wrong on that, but
Yeah, well, I'm glad that there's some people that aren't claustrophobic and can take care of those for us. And I know you also have two grown children and one granddaughter. Is it in Texas? Is that right?
yeah, my daughter and granddaughter in Texas, and my son is here in California.
That's awesome. Well, pretty much exhausts what I know about you. Can you tell us anything else about yourself, including any fun tidbits or hobbies?
Well, when you asked me that question earlier, what came to mind is I'm a therapist and I'm a trauma specialist, and I'm looking recently into the treatment of psychedelics for trauma. And
Hmm.
so I have experienced ketamine therapy myself because I also have PTSD from childhood trauma. And I'm looking forward to trying psilocybin in September. So I'm going to be going on a psilocybin retreat to use psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, for the treatment of trauma, PTSD.
Hmm. You're the second therapist that I've spoken to as an interview about using that. Not that was the topic I brought people on to talk about it. And I'm here to hear people's full stories. But Andrew Jasko, do you know that name?
Yeah,
Andrew
sounds
Jasko.
familiar.
Yeah, he talked about that and how healing it was for his journey and how he uses that in his therapy. And it's definitely something that I admit I don't know too much about. I haven't studied it at all, but it's on the list of things I want to get more educated about. So, and besides that, what else do you do with your time when you're not focused on
I'm
the work and
writing
the
right
books?
now. So yeah, so I write every day, and then I have my clients um, that I meet with one-on-one. And for fun, well, since the when the pandemic started and we had to shelter in place, my husband, son, and I started reading together at night. And we've kept it up and we love it. We're going through a um, fantasy series called The Forgotten Realms. It's from the Dungeons and Dragons game or books. And there's 33 books total, and I think we're at around 19, book
Hmm.
19 or 20 right now.
Wow,
So we've been doing that. We love it.
that's awesome. That's a good reminder to me. I need to be doing that more with my kids. Often life gets so busy, but it's an important part of life. And speaking of books, I know we're diverting here from your story for a quick side note. One of my other interviewees, I've interviewed him twice, I think, Jonathan M.S. Pierce over in England. He focuses more on, doing similar things to what I do, but he's written some books that are pretty much what you might classify as anti-apologetic. But he's also done some kids books more that they have in even elementary schools over there in Britain called The Curse of the Maya and something like that for the series. But I've heard that it's just been received, with stellar remarks. So if you ever need a book suggestion, I recommend that one. So it's a
Yeah,
plug
always
for,
looking for good book suggestions. Thank you.
yeah. And Jonathan,
First
if you're looking,
of the
you
Maya.
can pay me later.
Okay.
And was there anything else about yourself that we should know before we get started?
No, that's good.
Okay, perfect. And so at this point, I'd love to just kind of pass the mic to you to tell us your story and take us as far back as you can. And I'll throw some questions in here or there just to make sure I understand what what your journey's been like.
Okay. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm born in Hawaii. So my um, father is Japanese. He's passed away now. His parents immigrated from Okinawa to escape poverty, I believe. And then my mother's a first generation immigrant. So she was born in the Czech Republic. And my parents met during World War II. So my father was an American soldier in Europe, and he married my mom and then brought her over. And it was more of a marriage of convenience because my mom was looking to get out of war-torn Europe. She was 19 at the time and suffered greatly during the war. And so she immigrated to Hawaii, America. I don't think it was even a state back then. And so then they had 4 kids. I'm the third. And so my parents both come from pretty traumatic backgrounds. My dad actually ended up in an orphanage for about 5 years. And then, my mother came from out of the war, and just a lot of trauma, both of them. And then growing up, all I remember, by the time I came around, they had already been divorced and remarried, and a lot of fighting. I used to be scared quite a bit that they were gonna kill each other because it was pretty bad. And and then also as a child, I had been sexually assaulted, and my parents didn't really know. It was back in the 60s, so I was 6 years old, and there wasn't a whole lot of support or counseling, understanding about how to help kids back then like there is today. And so my mom didn't really know how to handle it, and dealt with it as like, we're just not going to talk about it. And
Mm.
so there's always there was always stayed with me, even though nobody talked about it. And that's later on I realized that I had developed PTSD from it. But
Mm.
what happened later, a little later, is we didn't go to church or anything. We moved from Hawaii to California right after the sexual assault, so I was around 7. I have like 0 memories of my childhood in Hawaii. I don't remember anything. That's also a symptom of trauma, childhood trauma. So we came to California, and there's still a lot of fighting and arguing going on. Um, and I met some friends in the neighborhood, and um, I remember going with them to church. I would get invited to go to church with other girls, the families in the neighborhood, because my family didn't go to church.
Hmm.
And so during the summer programs, the buses would come around, and I'd go. I always wanted to go. I didn't really understand much. Now I know what was going on. It was like evangelizing the kids of the neighborhood programs. And so I'd get saved all the time. If I was Baptist, I was Catholic, I was Lutheran, Methodist. I
Hmm.
just wanted to go because I don't know, just to be, have a friend to go somewhere with them at church.
Yeah. Can I ask a few quick questions? With the with the environment there, obviously I understand and I'm very familiar with the idea of what the church was doing, but what was it like in terms of any religious discussions that did happen in the home before that time and after? Like, was it more atheistic, or was it just like a, Christmas and Easter kind of religion? Like, how did it work?
No, they weren't atheists, they were Christian, but um I guess, you would could consider them backslidden Christians. By the
Mhm.
time came around, I was born, because they weren't going to church anymore.
Yeah.
Uh, so we didn't pray or anything. It's hard for me to remember exactly, but I remember those Bible story books that I think we had those Bible story books that you see at, they used to have them at the doctor's office and stuff with the pictures.
Yeah.
So I had that in the home, I'm pretty sure.
Hmm. In in terms of the fighting, I was just curious because you're bringing back some things from my memories too. Did you feel like you were either responsible in any way for their fights, or that you were obligated to try to step in and stop it?
I was too little and too scared to try and stop it. I felt really bad about um the fighting, but mostly I became like my mom's confidant. Like, she would complain to me about my dad all the time, and just tell me how miserable she was, and
Hmm.
how unhappy she was, and how um bad of a husband he was, and not realizing, the effect that it was having on me. I don't remember feeling like it was my fault. I felt that the sexual assault was my fault.
Hmm.
Definitely thought that. I knew that was because I did something bad, that happened to me. But as far as the fighting goes, I just remember being scared.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how much, so much of that stuff does, either, like you said, you repress some of it, but some of it does really come back to bite you in different ways. And I think sometimes it feels like peeling back the layers of an onion, where you think you've got an understanding of what happened and how it affected you, and then you peel another layer back and like, oh, there's more to this and there's more to this. And it is amazing. And I think it's a good reminder too that there's there's a lot of stuff that we all as adults struggle with, but it's such an important thing to try hard to protect kids from the harder parts of life, and to give them, not that every childhood is going to be magical, no matter how the parents are dealing with things, or how much money there is in the home, or whatever other issues there are. But just as, for us to remind ourselves, like, we literally can give our kids the gift of innocence, in some senses, of saying, like, you don't have to have the weight of the world on you as a 5-year-old, as a 10-year-old. Like, you can just enjoy, the beauty of learning how to color and play and build with blocks, and let that be the biggest issue on your plate. So anyway,
Yeah,
digress
I
there, but
agree. I agree. And I think the ability for parents to do that for their kids really is connected to, or is dependent upon how well they can deal with the stress in their lives, or how well. So my parents were consumed by their own issues, their own past, their trauma, and so their mind wasn't freed up to parent kids. They were um, still dealing with all the stress of their trauma.
mm,
And so I think the work that I've done, and then I went and passed it on to my kids because I didn't know any better either. um, but the work that I've done on healing myself has really benefited my kids in a way that I can give that to them now, even though they're adults.
yeah.
They're still my kids. So
Mm,
I can we can talk about what happened, like what went wrong, why I wasn't able to be there for them, emotionally present, and wasn't able to, give them that gift of innocence and childhood that I wish I had been able to do that for them. And at the same time, um, just being able to talk about it with them now helps them understand, like, oh yeah, that's what happened. I wasn't really, you know, crazy back then, or a bad kid. Um,
mhm.
yeah, so
That topic, and I know it's not the main topic for today, but that topic is definitely very apropos for my situation too. With as you would have, you're probably familiar with the phrase being unequally yoked. Where you've got a parent that's religious and a parent that's very much not, or very much an atheist, and for kids to see the difference of a parent that's got one worldview and another that's got a very divergent worldview. And even if you're trying very hard to be very, very amicable about it, there's still going to be some ways in which it's painful for both parents, and it is hard at times to not let that impact the way that you live your life. And it's I appreciate the reminder to try to keep that, not be the main part of their childhood that they hopefully remember, but to remember the beautiful parts. And it's very hard. And I think a lot of it too is when parents feel like they're alone, not just whether you're a parent, even if you're a single parent, but just when you feel like you don't have a community of people to talk to about things and you're dealing with things alone. I'm sure it's very difficult. I mean, I feel like I'm in a good spot where I've got a lot of community, people I can talk to and call and text and so forth, and email about what's going on in my heart, and get that support. But I imagine for people where they're like, I don't have anybody except my kids, no one, I can't talk to anybody else for whatever reason. I'm sure it's really a difficult situation, and it's hard not to want to bring them into the emotional side of it, because you're like, I'm drowning and they're the only ones here to talk to. But it's not
yeah,
necessarily the
yeah,
healthiest choice.
yeah. It's really hard. That's
Mm,
true. Yeah, support for parents is crucial. It's really important. And that's a big part of my parents' problem, was they were isolated.
yeah. Before you go on with your story, could I ask, you mentioned that you got saved. I think you said this, I may have misheard you, but something like you got saved several times, is that right?
Yeah, I would they'd ask for you to raise your hand, and I would raise my hand. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was pushed by the friends that I was with, that who had
Hmm.
brought me. So yeah, go forward, raise your hand.
Okay. And do you recall, though, was there were any of those instances ones where you felt like it was less external pressure and just you voluntarily wanted to do it?
Mm-mm.
Hmm, interesting. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for, I just wanted to make sure I understood where we were at with the story. Feel free to take us on to the next part.
Okay. So so what happened to my family is, my family had a huge uh, spiritual conversion, and it started with my sister. My sister and older brother, they're 10 years older than me. So there's a big age gap there.
Wow.
So she, and this was in the 60s, early 70s, when the hippie movement, the hippie movement was going on in especially in Southern California. And so my sister was a hippie and fought like horribly with my parents. Just really bad fights all the time. And so she had a spiritual conversion to Christianity. And um it's that Calvary Chapel flavor of Christianity.
Hmm.
The modern, it came out of the hippie movement. So very modern music with drums and, the Jesus freaks, you might have heard of them called.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So and then she invited my parents to go to her church, and my parents both um converted right away, or reconverted, I'm not sure, but to me it
Hmm.
was like this huge change all of a sudden. And I was around 11 or 12, I think. And it was a good thing for me because my parents stopped fighting so much. And it made a big difference in their relationship with each other. They stopped fighting with my brother and sister. Um, we had this community to belong to. We had friends all of a sudden. We would go to church Sunday morning, Sunday night. We joined the choir. We went Wednesday night. We went to youth group. We joined the bowling. I mean, we did everything with these people, our new family.
Mm.
And it lasted a few years. Um, but it wasn't a personal like conversion for me. Um, for me, it was more just enjoying the peace and the fun, and um, my parents were happy, and I was really close to my mom, super close to my mom.
Mm.
So I wanted, and my sister. My sister was a big, wonderful. She was a great big sister, and so then I became a teenager soon thereafter, and all the hormones, started kicking in, and I wanted a boyfriend. And there was this message, of course, a really strong message that you're not to have sex before marriage. And yet there was all this coupling going on constantly. It seemed like there was um, the main goal of this Christian new family that we had become a part of was to couple. Like that's what was going on all constantly, boyfriend and girlfriend, and and they would get married, and then they'd start having kids really young, like 18, 19, 20 years old.
Mm.
And that's what I wanted too. But then I liked reading like juicy not X-rated novels, but the juicy novels that teenage girls like to read, and um I started to I started to like split into like this good girl and the bad girl. And plus I had the sexual assault history, which nobody talked about. So that was, my fault. I was bad. I had this something about me that was bad. And so I kept splitting more and more, like um the good spiritual side, where I would, have good thoughts, pure thoughts, and be this good girl. But then I had this other side that I connected to, like my sexuality, um, my changing body, and wanting to have a boyfriend, wanting to experience, the physical, what the Bible called lust, those lustful desires they were like all in me. I knew they were in me, these lustful desires and thoughts, but I just couldn't admit it.
Did you feel like with that kind of battle going on, that if you whenever you were to make a choice toward having a boyfriend and being physical, that would basically be the equivalent of rejecting your commitment to the Lord, and basically kind of like they used to, I don't know if they painted this picture this way in your church, but like they would say, like, there's a throne of your life, throne of your heart, of your mind, and God is the king. And if he's not on the throne, it doesn't make him not the king, but you can sit on his seat and kind of pretend you're in charge of yourself when he's actually in charge. And doing things like you're saying, I think to a lot of us would feel like we're kind of trying to get God off the throne of our lives. Did it feel like that to you?
Yeah, it did feel like that if I was to have a boyfriend or ever get involved physically with a guy, that I would be backslidden. Like that would be definitely a sin.
Hmm.
And yet at the same time, there's this double message going on, because all the women and men in the church are modeling physical attraction. It was really confusing for me as a
Hmm.
teenager, trying to be a good Christian and yet dealing with the natural physical attractions. And the preaching that I was told was that um, we shouldn't want it, and yet everybody wanted it. Is so confusing, even to the point of like how I dressed and the makeup or fixing my hair, because the preacher would preach that that's not important, that the true spiritual woman goes after the heart of God and serves the poor and helps the sick, and it doesn't, it's the harlots that dress up. And yet,
Hmm.
every woman in that church dressed up to the hilt with makeup, and they were beautiful, gorgeous physically.
Hmm.
And so to me, it was very confusing.
Yeah, I could imagine. Was there the mixture too of the heavy courtship rules that some churches have, where, like, yes, we encourage you to be interested in marriage, but obviously within the confines of, ideally the guy goes to the girl's daddy first for permission, and then they're heavily monitored, and um, you've got chaperones and so forth, and obviously the modesty culture, not showing too much skin, and the implication of, if you're interested in this person, within a couple of dates, we expect to kind of know if it's heading towards marriage, because you're not just going to casually date for fun, because that's not what marriage is about, from the courtship perspective. Was that woven into your experience, or was like just general dating for fun allowed?
No, it wasn't dating for fun. I don't think the rules were very, explicit, but they were implied.
Hmm.
And I was younger than like the people that I hung out with, because my sister's older than me. So when they dated, almost everybody, when they started dating, they eventually got married, and pretty
Do
quickly,
you
pretty
think that part of
quickly.
that was the whole better to marry than to burn kind of thing?
Yeah, I think so. And it's what we wanted. It's what we wanted. I wanted to get married and I wanted to have kids. That's like even though I was kind of raised in the feminist movement had begun, and I was told you should go to college and you can do whatever you want, become whatever you want. It's not what I wanted. What I wanted was to get married and to have kids.
Mm.
It was modeled for me, and it was preached to me that that's my gift, you
Right.
know, to
That's the
God.
best life. Was there any pressure to have huge families, or was a small average family acceptable in those circles?
In this church, the average was like 3 or 4
Gotcha.
kids. Yeah.
The reason I ask is I'm sure you've come across the Quiverful movement, and I've even interviewed people where, if you're not aiming for 8 to 10 kids minimum, you're basically not trusting God with your fertility and your sex life. And it's a lot of pressure for people that either just can't handle that many kids, or for whatever reason, like it's just overwhelming you. But you get that pressure in those circles to just basically try to have as many kids as you can, and to at least obviously be very, very sexually active as a couple. And if you're not using anything to prevent pregnancy, to just put it in God's hands. And if he gives you 6 kids, if he gives you 8 kids, 10 kids, 12 kids, if he makes you the Duggars, trust the Lord. He's got a reason for giving you as many as you end up with. And obviously the whole pressure to celebrate life, which is a beautiful thing in itself. But you end up with a lot of families that end up having huge numbers of kids. So
Yeah. Yeah. I can't imagine having that many kids. And I have had clients with that belief system
hmm,
that were, I'm treating mom because she's got depression, she's got postpartum depression, and she can't deal with all these kids that she keeps having, and it's it's causing her mental instability, and it's it's a big strain on women to just keep having so many children. And what I know about parenting now is so important to really give each child the sense that you're there for them, that they're important, that you're available for that to them.
hmm,
And I think with these, I don't know, but it seems like with the large family, you will end up the older kids taking care of the younger ones because you need help.
yeah, that's a good way to put it. Exactly.
Yeah.
So when your parents got really serious about God and so forth with the church conversion or reconversion, what was your home life like, and like how did that change at that
It
point?
got better. It really got better. The fighting pretty much stopped, came to a halt. Um, and we were happy. We were really happy. My family, I'm the only one that's deconverted to an atheist. My parents, to the day they died, they were devout Christians, and my older brother and sister are still devout Christians.
Hmm.
And I don't know about my younger brother, but
Yeah, I
he,
definitely want
he
to
yeah.
circle back to how that's going for you these days, but I'm probably jumping ahead of the story a little bit. But that's good. Did they start to do things like at that time, family prayer time or devotions or whatever they call it, family altar? How did that time, like time that would be like church but at home, how did that come into play?
Well, we did start praying before meals, holding hands and praying before meals. And my mom started having her morning devotions with her Bible at the kitchen table. So became like her place, her little altar place where she would read her Bible and drink her coffee. And she smoked too. So she would smoke cigarettes and read her Bible. And um, I would talk to her about what she was reading. And we never had it as like a huge like family devotion time because we would go to church for that.
Hmm,
And my dad was very quiet. He wasn't very outspoken. He's a very quiet, introverted Asian man. So my mom was opposite. My mom was outgoing, parties, and liked to dance and have fun and drink. And so she was more the leader socially. And so as a family, we would go to church, and that's where we would get our spiritual feeding. Not so much in the home.
gotcha. I know we're going to probably go back in a second to some of the struggles with sexuality, but in terms of just your family reconverting and getting serious about God, so to speak, What was that like for you personally? Did you feel like you were at the same time doing the same thing? Were you feeling like you were on some levels getting serious with God? Or were you
Yeah,
kind
I
of on the outside
thought
of that?
it was, I tried my best. I tried to do what I saw my mom doing. I tried to, pray, and we would raise our hands in church, and I read my Bible. I I really tried, but nothing really personally. I never felt that God really was there. Like, like I hear people give their testimony of how they felt God's presence, or heard God's voice, or like God was interacting with them. I never experienced that. I
Hmm.
pretended that I did.
Did you have any kind of quiet time with God where you were, even if you didn't hear him, that you were talking to him as if hopefully he was listening to you?
Yes. Yeah, it was always one way pretty much with me praying to God to help me, or to help me understand the word, his Bible, or help me be a good person, or, bless my mom, bless my dad, help so and so who's sick. But I didn't hear anything from him.
Hmm.
And I blame myself. I kind of thought it was probably because I had these lustful thoughts, and this bad part of me, this dirty part of me that he wasn't pleased with, but I couldn't admit that. So I just kind of did the best I could, and hoped that one day, I don't know, something, I pretty much hung my hat on this idea of getting married. Like, I thought if I could get married, make, you know, that would legitimize the use of my body for sex, and that should please God.
Hmm. That is so, like, you're hitting on so many good points there. I don't know where to even start. But that, I mean, that's so typical, I think, for the experience that this worldview creates for so many of us, is you do feel like you're put in a spot that if you don't get married quickly, you are lusting, you are um, wanting these things that you, in one sense, shouldn't want, but that once you get married, you're completely allowed to want them. Everything that you shouldn't look at, or if you accidentally see something you shouldn't look twice, as soon as you get married, you're allowed to look, and it's almost like it's a sin not to look and enjoy it at that point. And so people are driven to marriage, and I think, as a side point, I think some people are probably driven to marriage too early for this issue, and probably the first decent, good-looking person that looks like they're normal and healthy, and they're going to be a good spouse and a good parent with you. For a lot of people, it's probably just like the first person that comes along. And I know some people that even, like, it was almost an ideal to not get serious with anybody and at all, like, just have a lot of friends but not get serious with anybody romantically until you were like, you kind of had that sense from the Lord, or the sense that he was leading you and guiding you, his will. He's opening doors for you to say, that's the person I've got for you. And like, as soon as you knew that, like, it didn't matter how much experience, if you'd known them for a month or 6 months or 10 years, like, if you had the spirits guiding you saying, that's the one I've got for you, that it was like, do it quick, get married, like, that's the one. And I'm sure some people have, for hopefully good reasons, waited longer and got to know the person and build a friendship. But I think a lot of people just dove in, partially because it's better to marry than to burn, but also it's like, once you know it, it's God's will, like, why wait? This is the best life. And I think a lot of people, um, I'm obviously preaching to the choir here, to you as a counselor, but it's just obvious that's not a foundation for marriage. Number one, you're building your marriage on your worldview. You're building your marriage on the worldview of mythology. But number two, you're just going too fast. You don't know the person. You need to see the ins and outs and what they're like on the good days and the bad days. And especially when you're hyper chaperoned, you literally don't get to see them much privately. And so there could be a whole different side to them that you just don't even know about. Do you kind of, either did you get that sense in your life or with people that you talk to about these issues?
Yeah. And not that you, of course, yeah, you don't know them, but the main issue I think is you don't know who you are. You don't
Yeah,
know yourself.
it's a good point.
And as a Christian, you don't know who you are because you're trying to conform your image into the image of Christ. And so
Mm,
your identity is all wrapped up into being Christ-like. And there's no room for you. In fact, you're trying to get rid of yourself.
yeah.
Like less of me, more of Christ, and less of me. And so how can you know who you are? If you don't know who you are, which I didn't know who I was until I was 50 years old and got into therapy, then how can I know, who's a good pick for me? So I was like almost desperate to find a husband, because I was when I talked earlier about being lost, that's why I joined the Navy, because I didn't have a husband yet.
Mm. With the sense that you mentioned before of like praying to God and not hearing his voice or hearing him and interacting with you on that intimate level that a lot of people talk about, when you bring that into the topic of looking for a spouse, did you feel like you were like was God's will part of it, or did you feel like he was kind of leaving you to make the best decision on your own, or like just how did you emotionally deal with um not feeling close to God, not feeling the voice of God in the context of looking for a husband, and what other big decisions were on the radar? Because that's a lot. It's a big weight to carry to think I'm
Yeah.
supposed to be this way and I'm supposed to be hearing him, but I don't. But life's moving on. The clock keeps ticking,
Mhm.
and decisions are need to be made about career and spouse and family and where I live and all that. And yet to not hear God's voice, it, I would imagine that it's a conundrum that's pretty difficult to deal with.
Yeah, it was chronically I was in a state of chronic stress. Chronic
Mm,
stress. I was constantly worried and scared, like a little kid running around in circles, not knowing where to go. I took a lot of my security from my mom, the relationship that I had with my mom and my dad too. My parents were always there for me. They never um gave me a sense that I was going to be kicked out or anything. Like I could always go home, and even though it would be a shameful thing probably to do, but I could go home and live with them. Um but it was, yeah, chronic stress. I barely got through college because I couldn't concentrate. I would relapse. I started drinking in college. And that's also it's a it's a symptom to deal with stress.
mm,
Drinking and having addictions, any kind of addiction is a symptom that you're in pain, emotional pain. So that would that would cause me to feel guilty because then I've um sinned and I've backslidden, started drinking. Um, so then I'd go back to church. So it was like this back and forth cycle of um, rededicating my life and getting saved many over and over again because I was never sure.
yeah.
Like you said, I didn't hear God's voice, so I was constantly scared that I was going to go to hell. So I had to rededicate my life over and over again. And
Was your
it's
church's
all
version of hell literal fire?
hmm
Yeah.
yeah. And I remember, that I didn't understand that about God either because I was told that God loves me. And yet I was also told to have the fear of God. And I remember asking my mom, like, why is it that I should be scared of God and yet he loves me? And she said something like, well, it's not to be scared of him, like it's more of like a
Right.
reverence for him. It's like, oh, okay. But I was scared of him.
Mm. And if that is obviously I think a conundrum that we all faced when we were Christians is that and many other similar things, but that one is just, it's such a clincher. I mean, it literally says things like, don't be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, he will reap. Meaning, like God's gonna get you back for you choose to give him the proverbial finger. And it says it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And you read stories about like Ananias and Sapphira who lied about how much they gave to to the church, and God strikes them dead. And other stories like that with you read Judas having betrayed Jesus, and it says it would have been better for him to have not been born. And it's like, obviously, too, going back to the bigger picture of the Old Testament, Yahweh has the earth swallow up people. And when the people of Israel, back when the time when the I forget what the group was that had stolen the Ark of the Covenant, but when it finally came back, because the other group was like, oh, things aren't going too well. I think Yahweh is getting us for having stolen this Ark. They finally send the Ark back on horses or donkeys, and some farmers see it coming back and like rejoicing, yes, the Ark of the Covenant's coming back to Israel. And they try to bring it back, and it says he kills, like, I think it's several dozen people or maybe more, because they were trying to look in and see what's inside the Ark. And it's like, this is a God who will zap you dead. And the one guy who tries to hold the Ark of the Covenant up from falling down and crashing, and he just by holding it up, you're like, you're not supposed to touch this thing. Again, struck dead. And so many horrible stories like that in the Old Testament. Even something as generic and commonplace back then as if you picked up sticks on the Sabbath, they would literally stone you to obey God. And it's like, God is gonna get you if you don't do exactly what he says. And then you get to 1 John, it's like, perfect love casts out fear. And you're like, but he's striking people dead for doing the littlest things. And he's so angry. And yet, and he even says, like, I'm going to get you. He says, like, if you reject me, I'll not only repay you, I'll repay you for several generations. Like, I'll repay your kids and your grandkids and your great grandkids. I will get you back for what you did to reject me. Like, this is a vengeful, nasty God. And yet he's supposed to have this perfect love that casts out all fear. It's like, it doesn't add up. I mean, you can spin circles all day around it. It's two different messages. It really is.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think that plays out even in early church history, where you had people saying the God of the Old Testament and Jesus are not on the same team. Jesus was sent by the real God to fight Yahweh, to beat Yahweh. It's like you see that played out with I forget, it was a Valentinianism or one of the other isms from early church history, but there were early Christians saying Jesus and Yahweh are not on the same team. And it's very, very clear that this has been something that we're all, I mean, for 2,000 years, people have been fighting about this, but I think to me, it's pretty obvious, they're not the same message, and you can't combine them. And if you try to do it with a human, you said to somebody, as if you were, say for me, a husband says to his wife, I love you so, so, so much. I would do anything for you, sacrifice for you. Your best interest is it's on the forefront of my mind. But if you don't love me back, I'll kill you. I mean, you'd call the cops. It's like, this is some nasty stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's it's confusing, and it forces you as a Christian to cherry pick, like which God are you
Yes.
going to follow? Which verses are you going to believe? Which verses are you going to put more weight behind? And then the other ones you have to just pretend they're not there,
Yeah,
or
it's
you
true.
can yeah. And my mom, she liked to focus on the love of God, and didn't, like, anything bad that came out that, showed that God was, violent or bad or had anger. That's Old Testament. I mean, that was like her line. That's Old Testament. Jesus is the New Testament. We live according to the New Testament. Like,
Yeah, we're
okay,
under grace now.
yes. Uh-huh.
It's amazing the things that the mental gymnastics we will do to explain this stuff away.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you can get the Bible to say whatever you want it to say. I mean, that's why we have so many cults and so many different denominations, and all following the Christian Bible,
Yeah.
but they're teaching quite different, principles. And
Hmm. It's amazing. I mean, what you're saying too reminds me of the thing about. I assume your church would have hyper defended that Jesus was God, that even though he
mhm,
was part of the Trinity, and yet when you look at the Gospels, they say stuff like Jesus says, why do you call me good? No one's good except God. And then it says the day of the Lord, um, the day of his coming or whatever it is, his kingdom, like no one knows it, not even me. Only God knows it. I'm like, well, why didn't that stand out to me? And sometimes I feel like I'm shaking my head at myself. Like, do you not hear it? Jesus himself is saying, no one's good, including me, except God. Why are you calling me good? I'm not God. And he's saying, I don't even know the time when the end is going to come. Only God knows that. It's like, well, if he's God, he would know that because he's God. It's like, but yet you get to, the Gospel of John, where, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. And you're like, okay, by the point you get to that gospel, it's like, they're now the same. God and Jesus are identical. And I am the Father of one. You've seen me, you have seen the Father. And it's amazing. It's like these are different stories that we just kind of, like you said, we cherry pick, or we kind of try to harmonize it, and
mhm,
we categorize it, like you said, it's law versus grace, Old Testament, New Testament, and we find
mhm.
all these ways. And did you get into? By the way, did you do that at all with dispensationalism? Did that come up for you? You know what I'm referring
No,
to?
no.
Okay, I won't divert it, because that's an interesting way that Christians often try to put things into buckets and say, there's like different time frames and God would deal with people differently. And that's why he would say, for Abraham, there's one way of being righteous, and, Noah and Adam and Eve and so forth. And, there's different ways to be right with God in different epochs, and he's dealing with this differently. So you can't like read the story of Abraham and Isaac or Noah and necessarily apply it in the same way to Christians today, because God has different plans for different periods of time. It just, variation on the theme of finding ways to explain the discrepancies away. But anyway,
Mhm. No, I have heard that before. I've heard that explained before, because how else can you explain it? It doesn't make sense otherwise,
yeah.
it's like,
When
yeah.
you were in the Navy, how did you and your husband actually like physically meet? Was it a accident or blind date, or how did you get connected?
Well, so I was on the tender in Charleston, and he was a part of we had this big job coming up called the steam generator cleanup or something like that. And he was a part of the crew that they took from other tenders along the East Coast to come and help us. So I worked for him um, for about 3 months.
Hmm.
So that's how we met. And before he came there, he had a reputation of being a Jesus freak. And the other sailors in my division, they would make fun of him. Oh, that Husen guy's coming. Oh my God, he's such a Jesus freak. And they had all these crazy stories about him. And um, I was curious because I think I had recently rededicated myself again, because I'd gone off on this drinking binge, and then I thought, oh, I better get right with God again. So I had rededicated myself, and then I was like, oh, well, maybe this guy might, if he's a Christian, he might be a prospect. And yeah, I remember meeting him. He was really cute. He was really smiley. He was very happy Christian, um, very outspoken. And then um, he had a girlfriend at the time. So I just started asking him, and I was curious, of his attitude and his upbeat, his work ethic, and it didn't seem to bother him that everybody like talked behind his back about being a Christian. And he seemed kind of proud of it. And he carried his Bible with him, his little pocket Bible with him. And he also carried these little cards. And so it turns out that he was a part of the Navigators. Have you heard of the Navigators?
But yeah, my dad was a navigator. Yeah.
Okay. So he was the navigator, and he had these little memory memory card verses that he kept in his pocket. And I started asking him questions about that. Um, and they're trained. So navigators are trained to mentor. They're trained to disciple
Hmm.
new Christians. That's like their specialty.
Yeah.
And I was the I was a willing pupil. I was like, teach me. I want to know. I've been trying to figure this Christianity out. And I need to you know, learn what you have. And I want what you have.
Hmm.
And so he started discipling me, and um, you know, eventually we started getting close. We became friends. Like I said, he had a girlfriend, and so then he ended up breaking up with her to pursue the relationship with me so we could start dating.
Hmm.
And we started dating. And
Was it um,
and
one
I
of
was
those things where you
happy. I was
were,
like, finally.
was it like an expectation of this is heading to marriage quickly, or were you all moving slowly, or what
Oh
was the
no, I
pace
wanted
like?
to get married like as soon as possible, but he wanted to ask my dad, you know, do it the traditional way. So what we did is we took leave together and came back to he ended up we actually grew up close to each other. He grew up in Corona, I grew up in Orange County. So our families were all in the same general area.
Hmm.
And so we
That's
took
convenient.
leave. It was convenient. We came back, and he asked my dad for my hand in marriage, and then we officially got engaged. And then a year later we came back again and got married. My mom and sister took care of all the wedding arrangements and everything, and so we came back, got married, and that was in 1986.
Hmm. And at that point, did you feel like your relationship with Christ, because of, his help and mentoring and all that, did you feel like you were entering marriage not just close to him, obviously, but close to the Lord, and that there was some healing of your distance from God, or were you still feeling like that was a gaping hole, like that you needed to still figure out how to be close to God?
No, I actually felt like I had arrived.
Hmm.
Like he taught me that God speaks to you through the Bible, through the word. Like you're waiting for some mysterious voice in your mind, and that's not how God speaks to you. God speaks to you through his word. When you pray, that's you speaking back to God.
Yeah.
So this is the relationship that you read your Bible, that's God speaking to you, and then you memorize his word. It becomes part of your spirit and your mind, and you start you start transforming into becoming more Christ-like. And then you have to follow the four I forget what they're called now, but
Spiritual laws.
yeah, you have to read your Bible, you have to go to church, you have to evangelize, and you have to pray.
Hmm.
And so I did those. Like, I mean, if I had a structure like that, I could follow it, and then it made sense to me.
Yeah. It's interesting that you describe that, of kind of escaping this idea of God, please speak to me directly, and just to get the experience of saying, God, you are speaking to me through the word. That was actually more how I grew up, and it may have been partially because my dad was, a navigator, and he actually traveled around the world, with them doing. He was big into basketball. He's passed now, but he was big into basketball, and he would go around the globe and literally play basketball with people in different groups and college age groups, and then do a gospel presentation. And my dad was really big into it. He had this thing he'd do. I'll just divert just for a second. He would take a basketball, and he would spin it, and he would, like, on his finger, and he'd put it behind his head, and you could see it, the spinning behind his head. And then he like switch his knuckles. It'd be like, we'd go from knuckle to knuckle behind his head. He'd always like to show off what he could do with the basketball. But anyway, the whole idea, like you're saying, like you listen to God through listening to his word. It's not, and therefore it's not subjective. It isn't like, well, God told me to go to this place. It's like, well, why does he tell you to go somewhere, but he doesn't tell me somewhere? It's like, there's no subjectivity. The word of God is the word of God. And whatever he originally meant for the original audience is what he means for you to get. And it's not subjective. And it's not like, well, I think it means this, I think it means that. It's like, it means what it means. And it took away a lot of the vagueness. And in that context where I grew up with what you're saying there at the end, I did an internship with this in one of my churches I grew up with, basically from my young teenage years all the way through adulthood. And one of the pastors, or I should call him a senior elder, he one time after church asked to speak with me because I was doing an internship, and I spent most of the time with the senior pastor, but he wanted to talk to me too. And he was the head of a mission board, very respected man, preached a lot. And so we just, the whole church was done. It was like a Wednesday night prayer meeting, and everyone's out. It's just him and me. We just pull two chairs together as guys do in the church and just kind of sit and pray for a while and talk. And he finally gets real like serious. Like I'm thinking like we're going to get into something deep here. And of course I highly respected him. I wanted to hear what he had to say. And he says, "What is God saying to you, Tim? What has he been saying to you recently?" And I answered with kind of what you just said about, well, like I've been deep in the word. I'm in the word all the time. Listening to sermons, I'm reading commentaries. I'm in the word nonstop. I'm listening to him. That's what he's saying to me. He's saying to me is the Bible. And he just looked at me like confused. And we went back and forth a couple of different ways. Like, he was like, no, but that's what he's saying to all of us. But what is he saying to you? And I tried real hard to make sure I was clear. Like, are you actually saying like God's speaking to me directly as opposed to anyone else? He's like, yes. Like, what is he saying to you? And I felt so embarrassed. I was like, I don't think I've ever heard God speak to me. And he was like, you're studying to be a pastor and God isn't speaking to you? And I remember just thinking, oh my gosh, like, how do I take this? Because I'm like, I thought the measure of a good pastor was you're a master of your craft of being in the word of God. You know the Bible backwards and forwards. You know, the Bible runs through your veins, as it were. It's in your blood. And he's like, that's just like for everybody, but you know, you need much more than that. And it really threw me off of my off the tracks for me, because I was like, he's not talking to me. And what do you do with that when when you expect God? It was kind of where you started and escaped. I kind of started the flip flop and got confronted with that issue of not hearing God, and it threw me for such a loop, because I was like, how can you conjure it up if you don't hear God speaking? You can't make him speak. And
what did that pastor say to you? Like, what was his explanation?
he basically just said, like, you really need to go back to God with a broken heart, and just start to really open your heart up more and more to, there's something blocking. It's like a blockage. It's like you've put some kind of muffler, so to speak, on your spiritual ears, but you have to have ears to hear the Lord. And it says in Revelation that the Spirit was speaking to the churches, and he wasn't speaking to each church generically, but he was speaking to specific churches. Like, let me talk to the church in Philadelphia, let me talk to the church in whatever. And he's saying things specifically to specific groups. He's like, God has something specific for you. And I took that as at the time, as I don't think I agree. Like, I think God isn't speaking to individuals, because we could be different. Like, I could say, I think, I'm just picking something here, but I think God is saying to our church that we need to have women pastors. And someone else is saying, absolutely not. God's saying no women pastors. Like, well, how do you solve that? If God's speaking to you and you're both butting heads, you can't get anywhere. So at the time, I honestly it sent me to a tailspin. And I eventually let it go. But I think what it left me with is this feeling of, I wonder if I'm deficient spiritually. I wonder if there's something in me that's messed up. And I think, you're saying something similar, just from a different perspective. But at the end of the day, you just feel like there's no way that if there's something deficient in my experience, in my walk with God, or my evangelism, prayer life, it can't be God's fault. It's got to be our fault. And therefore, what in the world's wrong with me?
Yeah. But you know what? Who says that guy is right? Why do we believe, the this guy that says one thing, like you have to have God's voice in you, or a navigator who says, no, it's not like that. And I wonder if it's the more liberal Christians who started to like think that they had their God was speaking to them personally
Yeah.
so that they could get out of the conservative view of it, the Bible is the inerrant word of God. And because I remember my husband went to Covenant College, and I didn't know this at the time, but he actually started deconverting in college because he got into these big fights with his classmates and professors about that issue of women should be allowed to preach. Why can't women become pastors? And at the time, it was a very liberal, and it still is kind of a liberal idea for Christians, for Christian
Yeah.
churches to have a women in leadership roles. And he started deconverting way back then.
Hmm. It's very, I literally just read an article today. Have you been following the Southern Baptist Convention stuff at all?
Mm-mm.
You know the pastor, what is his name? He wrote the book, The Purpose Driven Life. I should know his name, but
Oh, Rick Warren.
Rick Warren. Have you followed his story at all?
I know a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know a little bit about his story.
it is a little bit of a rabbit trail, and I apologize, but hey, I'm good. I like rabbit trails a little bit. But so he's retiring from the pastorate, and
Oh,
in his place, he's installed a husband-wife combination pastorate.
oh,
And so they're in the Southern Baptist Convention, and the Southern Baptist Convention, I don't think, allows that. So they're like debating whether to kick him or his church out. Like, how are you installing a husband and a wife as pastors to replace you as you retire? And it's interesting to see it. And
yeah.
I always
That's
get
a
a chuckle
scandal,
because
right?
it's a huge scandal to them.
Yeah.
And yet I love, I almost, I feel like, I mean, I don't love it. I feel bad for them, obviously, but I'm like sitting back thinking, you all are wrangling over all these topics. You're wringing your hands. You're, just in so much angst over it. I'm like, it's stinking mythology. Like it's not, none of it's real. I mean, you might as well argue over whether, which Star Wars episode you liked. It's like, it doesn't matter. It's like, it's just a story. Like it's not affecting your daily real life. And yet to them, they make it obviously affect their real life just purely because they're stuck in it. But anyway, I want to get back to your
Yeah.
story. What happened next?
Okay, so I got married, and things were really good for us for about 4 years. I
Was that 4 years when he went to the college?
No, it was 4 years before we had kids.
Okay. Where was the college, by the way, in
So
that time?
I was still in the Navy for 2 years, so he was my dependent. And then when I got out of the Navy, then we were being mentored by a navigator couple who suggested that Jim and I go to the Leadership Development Institute in Colorado Springs, Colorado, because he felt that Jim has, leadership potential. We might become missionaries.
Hmm.
So we went through the training. We had to raise funds like missionaries to go to this Leadership Development Institute for 2 years, where we worked at their headquarters. So it was a conference center, Navigators Conference Center and headquarters. So we were mentored by another couple, wonderful couple. Um, and we also participated in the classes. And then we also worked there at the conference center for 2 years.
Hmm.
And and then we had our first child. So right at the end, I got pregnant, and we had our first child there right as we were leaving. But before then, Jim decided that he wanted to go to college and get an education. Prior to that, he had that attitude that, oh, education is like the wisdom of the world. And I want the wisdom of God. I want the wisdom of the Spirit. I don't need the academic wisdom of the world. And but then he changed his mind and he said, well, I want to go to college and become a pastor.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay. So at that point, I'm still very supportive. What happened was when we had kids is I became triggered. I think we both became triggered. We became triggered from our childhood traumas when we had children of our own. And my husband got, I mean, it sounds kind of a little embarrassing to say, but he was jealous of my attention for our children. So I felt like this in between person trying to please my husband, who's mainly he wants sex and frequently. And I have these little kids to raise now that I feel attached to, of course. And so I feel this pull for my attention both ways. And it caused a lot of problems in our relationship.
Hmm.
Caused a lot of problems. And um the church kept preaching, you meet your husband's needs first, like the marriage is the most important thing, and you get closer to your husband, you get closer to God, and then your kids they'll benefit from it. Somehow it passes on to your kids, and your kids see the love of God that you have for each other. And that's that's all I knew, but it wasn't working in our home life. It was all I could do to keep it together to get to church regularly and portray as much as possible a happy family.
Hmm. Did it feel like it was becoming a facade on some levels?
It did. I felt like it was all my fault though. I felt like again there's something wrong with me.
Hmm.
Um I don't parent my kids the way I don't have like this love and closeness with my kids like I see other Christian moms. I don't have a natural knack for motherhood like I see other moms have. Um I knew there was I like at night when if my kids got sick at night, I would sleep through the night. My husband's the one that would wake up and take care of them. I wouldn't hear a thing. And I knew that was not normal. Or I thought, like, that's odd. Why don't I wake up? Why doesn't he wake me up?
Hmm.
So there wasn't a natural uh, ability for me to parent my kids. And I looked for help in the church, my husband, my mom, friends, people to help me raise my kids.
Hmm.
And at the same time, my husband and I weren't very, happy because he's a hard worker in his what he was taught, by the church and his father too, was to provide.
Hmm.
That's your job, to provide. And so he was going to school and working at the same time and never home, hardly ever home. When he was home, he wanted to be with me. And so it was hard. We didn't fight like my parents used to fight, like real vocally. I would get real quiet. Our fighting was more very subdued.
Mhm.
So kind of subdued unhappiness. But that going to church every week kept us together.
Did you feel at all like there was a sense of, because you were obviously trying to live a life that was honoring to the Lord, you were trying to raise your kids as Christians, you're trying to go to church, but also in the maybe career sense, you're trying to be missionaries or to be a pastor and pastor's wife. Was there a sense at all that God's surely going to fix this and bless it? Surely, because we're laying down our lives for the sake of ministry. We're laying down our lives for the sake of other people, for the church, for the kingdom. There's no way that God can't bless and heal and restore and make things solid. You know, we're going above and beyond everybody else in church to do the right thing for the kingdom, to put God first in our lives and in our family. Did you get the sense that there
Mhm.
was like a underlying promise, like God's going to fix this? Just give it some
Yes,
time. He's
I did. I did. I trusted in that God would bless us. I trusted that everything was going to work out. Um,
Mm,
so he didn't uh, become a pastor. What happened was is he did graduate from Covenant, but then he wanted to become a professor. So that meant grad school.
like of theology.
Yes, I
Okay.
think no, a professor of history, I think, American history.
Okay.
So yeah, he switched his career goals.
So he wouldn't have
And
necessarily needed to, if he had pursued that, he wouldn't have necessarily needed to be like in a Christian college or a church atmosphere to do that. Correct.
no,
Okay.
no, but he had a specific Christian professor that he wanted to work under. I forget his name now, and he didn't get accepted into that program. And so at that point, I wanted to go home. You know, our kid, I had two kids now, and they were both very little. I was homesick, and I was like, well, if we're not going to grad school, let's go home, and we'll figure it out in California. We'll live with my parents for, they said, yeah, come on back. You can live here rent free for a year, get yourself settled, get a job, and save up money, and then you can get, move out and get a place of your own. And so we did that, and those 6 months were really nice for me because I had my mom help me with my kids,
Hmm.
and it was a relief for me. And then the problem though was my mom and my husband fought. They didn't get along. So they had quite a few bad fights, and we had to move out early. So we moved out early. We moved out after 6 months, and got a mobile home. And then my husband decided he wanted to be an attorney.
Hmm.
So
That's quite a few different divergences.
yeah. So then he's like, it'll pay off, Dorothy. One day it'll pay off. I'm gonna make money one day. So okay. So then I was working at the post office swing shift. He would work during the day at UCI. It's just in maintenance. And then he went to night school 3 days a week. And we had babysitters watch our kids. And so our kids were really neglected. Uh, we weren't very present parents, although um, we thought we were good parents because we went to church, and we didn't have loud fights. We had disagreements, but we didn't have loud fights or anything like that. But what happened was is our kids started to react to the emotional neglect. And so our daughter got into drugs, alcohol, and partying, and not going to school. And then that's when the household turned into the household of my childhood, with a lot of fighting between mainly Jim and my daughter, our daughter, who's the young teenager at this time.
Hmm. Had your kids made professions of faith at that point?
Yes, they both did. I mean, when they were little, when they
Hmm.
were young, like 10 years old, they were both baptized as infants. And then they were both baptized around 10 years old. And then my daughter went ahead and was baptized twice more as an adult. But at this time, she had made the profession of being a Christian at around 10 years old or so.
Okay.
So, the ladies in church at my Bible study would just tell me, "Oh, she's creating her testimony. You're good parents. You're good parents. Just keep praying, you know." And we got her into therapy, but not ourselves in therapy. We were the ones that needed the therapy.
Hmm.
But of course, we blamed everything on our daughter and that she was rebelling against God. And we got her into therapy, which the therapist is like, you guys need to back off and give her some space. She's a good kid. The 6 months restriction, that's ridiculous. You can't control your daughter like that. So we did get some good advice from her therapist. A lot better advice than we did from our Christian friends
Yeah,
who
for
just
sure.
kept telling us, pray, pray. But it got so bad that we eventually, I didn't know what to do. I was worried that she was going to die. Of course, you worry about your kids, getting in a car accident or overdosing or something. So, because she had tested positive for meth, we had tested her.
Hmm. It's a
And
scary place to be.
yeah, and so um I kind of put out an email to the family saying, like, I don't know what to do. And my brother suggested that we send her to a camp for kids, like a Christian camp or a school program for I forget what they call it, like disturbed kids, rebellious kids. And so yeah, we did that because we just didn't know what else to do.
Did that
And so
make any difference?
yeah, I mean she got through her teenage years. So from 16 to 18, she lived at this school,
Hmm.
and it was called Julian Youth Academy. And of course, she had to get clean and sober. There's no drugs there.
Right.
And she supposedly became a Christian. It was a Christian program, so she followed the what everybody, just to get along, to get their privileges and stuff. They have to convert to Christianity. But it was a fake, really, for her.
Hmm.
Because when she got out, she got back into drugs again.
Hmm. That's so heartbreaking. I'm just curious for context. Where were you all? I know you mentioned that your husband had some questions, about women pastors when he went to Covenant College. Would you say that there were any cracks developing at that point in your overall faith and worldview, or was that still fairly intact as far as you understood at that point? At what point were the earliest cracks starting as far as you would describe it?
For me personally, there weren't any cracks until I got into therapy. That
Okay.
was that was when the cracks started to form. Up to this point, I'm just like hanging on, like with, um, you know, uh, I'm just getting through, trying to get through raising my kids.
Right. But worldview wise, knowing that God's there and God's got your family in his hands, so to speak, and he's going to make this right. And,
Hmm.
especially with prayer and church and so forth, he's going to, even I remember Jim Dobson. Did you get under Jim Dobson's work at all? He would
Yeah.
talk about how, so many parents would kind of get so upset because kids would go through seasons like what you're talking about. And he'd say, like, look, every family has some or all kids that go through this. It's a natural part of life. It's growing into adulthood. And he said, like, look, just love them to death and they'll come back to Jesus. I'm paraphrasing there. But I remember listening to a lot of his radio programs, and he would encourage people like, look, don't worry about this. Leave it in God's hands. Love them, give them the love of Jesus. They make choices that's still on them, but you just do what's right, and don't write off your kid's future just because they're making a few short-term bad decisions. As long as you raise them to love the Lord, it says, what's that proverb? Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. And
Mhm.
like if you raise them to love the Lord and to love the Word of God, God's going to use that, and He's going to bring it back, and He'll restore things, He'll make things right, and He'll make things even better. Like you've suffered for a little bit, He'll make it even much better. And kind of like was it Genesis 50 with Joseph and his brothers? What you meant as evil against me, the Lord meant as good. And there's some hardships, but God's working in this. You can trust Him. He's going to make it a beautiful tapestry in the end. And I know that was kind of my understanding too. And I've got little kids now, so I have still to go through the gates that you were talking about, of seeing what they choose to do as teenagers. But I know that was, if I had been a Christian still, that would have been my expectation, that if they make some bad choices, as long as you raise them with the gospel and the Bible in their worldview and their minds to love the Lord with all their heart, God's going to do something great with that. And that's all you have to do. Just get the word of God and the love of Jesus in their heart, and you'll get the gospel there. Did you mentioned earlier you and your husband had some issues with that? Were there some good times though of kind of restoration or healing for you all as a couple in those years?
As a couple, yeah, we we got involved in dynamic marriage, so that helped us quite a
Is that a
bit. And
program?
it's a program to help married couples meet
Okay.
each other's needs. Like you identify what your top four needs are, and then you intentionally work on meeting each other's needs. So
Yeah.
it helped. It was like a patchwork for us. It helped get us through. Gave us friends as well, other couples, friends that helped us through that period. But the problem with the parenting, there was no real help in the Christian church, in my opinion. That message of keep praying and keep loving them and they'll come back to Jesus, that's meaningless when you're dealing with a relationship with a teenager every day that you don't know what to do. Like I just didn't know what to do. I mean, the praying, yeah, I'd prayed and it was meaningless. It wasn't helpful. And um I think about it now as an atheist, like what gives Christians the authority to tell us how to parent when you're getting nothing out of a book from a God, Jesus, who's not a parent, he's not married. There aren't any good examples of how to parent securely. There's a lot of examples of bad parenting and bad relationships, but there aren't any good examples. And Jesus wasn't a parent. So now looking back, it doesn't surprise me that the help that I got from the church was empty. It was empty help. It really did not help my kids. It helped
Mm.
me maybe a little bit to calm myself down and trust in God, trust in God. So it kind of helped me a little bit. It was absolutely no good for my kids. My kids were lost. They needed their parents, and I was not able to be there for them. And so they were left on their own. And I think a lot of their um, emotional and mental anguish came from the fact that I was pressuring them to become Christians. I wanted them to be Christian. I wanted them to make me proud when I went to church that they were good Christians, like all my other friends, all my other friends had good Christian kids. What's wrong with my kids?
Yeah.
And what's wrong with me? you know? And they rebelled against it, and I'm glad they did. I'm glad they did, that they had enough sense of themselves that to say that no, I'm not gonna allow you to force me to be who you want me to be,
Mm.
because they have a right to be who they are, which is how I believe now. And with what I teach people, how to parent securely, is we want to be validated for who we are, not pushed into this box that our parents want us to be in.
Yeah. That is such a critical message. I I love that. I love with my kids sending the message of saying the message, I guess you'd call it, of empowerment and autonomy, kind of like you might say to a little girl and say there, there's family coming over for the holidays or something that she's not doesn't know everybody, say Uncle so and so wants to give her a big hug, and she's like, I don't want to give him a hug. It's like, well, even if he's not to say, Uncle so and so is creepy or something, but she just doesn't want to. She just doesn't know him enough. And you do see these stories, at least in past generations, where it was just like, no, 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 give him a hug, give him a hug. And I love how in this generation it seems like, and I for my passion with my kids and my conversations is to say, like, you just like you get to pick who you hug. And even at night, like I'll go into the bedroom and say, who wants a hug at night? And I always make sure that they indicate if they want a hug or not. And um, just kind of transferring that bodily autonomy to thought autonomy, to say, who has the power over not just your body, but who has the power over what you believe. And of course, the answer is always, from their perspective, I do. I have the power. I have the power. And I love instilling that. I love that they get that. And I even did some recent videos on that where I just mentioned, and I even show them visually, like I visualize this with them where I'll have them put up their hands, and I'll take my hand and I'll pretend that I'm trying to like be a manipulator, and I'll say like, hey, I want to change your worldview, and I'll literally teach them like, push back against my. It's like, no, push. I want to. You have to believe like I do. No, I don't. You have to believe like me. You're going to burn in hell. No, I don't. And we use to the that the movie The Matrix.
Mhm.
Have you seen that? Where Neo, at the near the very end, they're firing all those bullets at him, and at first, they actually shoot him and he dies, but then he comes back up, and because they're so shocked that he's resurrected, they shoot all these bullets again, like a whole wall of them, and that time he understands his role, of course, and he sees the Matrix, and he just puts his hand up, and the bullets only come but so far, and they just stop and they drop. And I teach them like, look, when you see bullets coming at you of worldview things that say you have to be like this, that, like, just put your hand up. You don't have to. You can drop those bullets. And I think the message is getting through. That you
That's
do have that
great.
autonomy. You
Yeah,
you have
that's
the power.
awesome. That's right. That's right. And that's beautiful that you're able to teach your kids that, instead of the opposite message, which is what I taught, was you don't have a right to say no. Like, I'm the parent, you're the kid, and you don't have a right to say no to me. That's
Mm.
disrespecting me. But I love what you're doing.
Did
Yeah,
do
that's
you
awesome.
did the fear of hell come into the equation at all in terms of
Oh
them needing
yeah.
to believe like the parents in the church?
Mhm. Yeah, it was always, my concern. I believed in hell, so it was my duty as a mom to make sure my kids chose heaven and
Mm.
not hell. And interestingly, my son, I think it was 14 or 15 years old, he actually came up to me and told me he was an atheist.
Wow. While you were still a Christian,
Oh yeah. Mhm.
that must have
And
terrified
I
you.
was just like, "No, you're not." He's like, "Yes, I'm an atheist." And I'm like, "I don't believe you. You're just building your testimony." I was like so in denial. I was so really dismissive of him and his autonomy. My kids wanted their autonomy and they fought for it. Um, and
Hmm.
I tried to take it away from them, but I'm glad that they found themselves eventually without me.
Did your sons saying that become at all a crack in the wall for you in terms of your beliefs? Or I know you said it came out in therapy, but was that a part of your story at all?
No, no, what happened was, so my husband became an attorney and it did pay off. He did start making a lot of money. And however, there was never enough. And so he was working himself to death. And after about 15 years, he said, I can't keep doing this. I'm going to die of a heart attack. Um, I can feel it, I can feel it in my body. So this is what we're going to do. We're both going to go back to school. We're going to become therapists. And then we're going to be able to maintain our lifestyle because we'll both be professional, we'll have professional jobs, both of us. And apparently he'd always wanted to go into psychology, but chose, the law instead. And but he had an interest in psychology, and I'm still just the supporter. I still have no real sense of myself, no confidence in myself. So when he suggested that, I agreed, but inside I didn't really think I could do it. But
Hmm.
I agreed because what other choices did I have? In my mind, I didn't have any other choices. So,
Was there an understanding that he was the head of the home?
mhm,
Okay. So was it
mhm,
like a complementarianism perspective?
mhm,
Okay.
yeah.
Hmm.
So, luckily for me, it was, serendipitous, I guess, that in order to become a therapist, you have to get your own therapy. It's a requirement. And I'd never been in therapy because I didn't think I didn't think therapy would be a good thing for a Christian. For me as a Christian woman to to open myself up to secular therapy was not a good thing. And it did turn out that way because I eventually deconverted because I recognized that I was suffering from PTSD from my childhood. And my therapist diagnosed me pretty quickly.
Hmm.
She said, "You have PTSD." And I was like, "What? No, I don't think so." And she's like, you know, uh, deep down inside, I did believe her. I figured she was probably right because there had been signs throughout my life that um, something was wrong with me, and I had always equated it to sin and my sexual being sexualized, I guess, as a kid, and my sexual problem that I had. And but then she was offering me a different solution or a different reason behind all my problems that I'd been having. And when I started to heal, I started to feel better. And then the big question was, why didn't the big question I had was, why didn't 30 years of praying and reading my Bible and practicing and being a good Christian, why hadn't 30 years healed me before? And now in therapy, I'm actually getting better.
Hmm.
And I couldn't understand that. I was questioning, like, why? What happened? And why didn't I get better from being healed by Jesus like I thought I was?
Hmm. What an amazing breakthrough.
Yeah.
And did you feel like you could talk about some of those deeper questions with your husband or any, kind of church leaders, anyone that you could say, what is the church? What is the Bible have to say about this? And like, how did you try to, I assume, fight off the doubts?
Yeah, in the beginning, I was still felt so much shame about my childhood and my past that the only person I could really open up to was my therapist.
Hmm.
I couldn't talk to anybody else about it. Later on, when I got into mind body therapy, the alternate forms of therapy other than talk therapy, have you heard of EMDR?
If I
I'm
if I have, it was in passing. I don't know what it is now.
Okay. So there's different modalities of therapy other than talk therapy. They're called mind body or somatic therapies, and they involve connecting to your body and getting in touch with your body and your body memories
Hmm.
and healing at that level, not just intellectually talking, but really getting connected to your past and your trauma through your body, and then and then developing resourcing within your body. And so after years later, I'd graduated, and then I had to actually start training as a therapist, and I couldn't do it. I would get triggered. I would get triggered in therapy trying to talk to somebody about their problems. And so I had a supervisor who's a trauma specialist. And so she helped me with EMDR therapy. And then I also got trained in what was called brain spotting. It was called brain spotting back then. It still is called brain spotting, but there's another therapy called comprehensive resource model. So during those therapies, when I really started to heal significantly through what's called inner child work, or you might have heard it called inner family systems or ego state work.
Hmm. No, this is all new to me.
Okay. So it's connecting to your inner child, that your memories, the trauma that happened when you were a child, um, and reparenting yourself, which is where I got, the title of my new book and my course. And you, the adult, the present day adult, being present and reparenting your inner child by being there, nurture, creating safety, connection, like you're not alone. It's not your fault. And then I started to release and really heal a lot of that shame and terror, the survival terror that I would get triggered into, and I couldn't talk or couldn't move. I'd freeze. I started to heal that aspect of myself.
Hmm.
And then at this time I'm still a Christian, but I'm starting to question now. I'm really starting to question, like, why is this stuff working and becoming a Christian didn't work, didn't heal. If God is all knowing, if God is all wisdom and powerful, how is this secular therapy helping me so much when all the years of Christian practices didn't work? Like all the power of the God Spirit and Jesus in my heart didn't work.
Yeah. That's
And
that's blowing me away to even think about. It must have been so crazy of a journey going through that.
yeah,
Both the,
yeah,
the
it was.
healing, but also the questions that arose.
Yeah, then the questions started arising. And then I did start questioning and talking to people. I started talking to my pastor's wife, um, some family members that were strong Christians, other women, mainly women. Um, about these questions that I had. Like, I read my Bible and I just like, I'm beating myself up. Every time I read my Bible, I end up beating myself up and the shame comes back. And yet I go into therapy and I experience unconditional love and acceptance. Unconditional love and acceptance. Doesn't matter. Wasn't my fault. I'm not bad.
Mm.
It's okay to get angry. It's okay to have feelings. It's okay to have lustful thoughts. It's no big deal. It's no big deal to masturbate. It's not a sin. It's natural. It's just natural. And so I started to question and ask people about it, but they didn't know what to do. They didn't have any answers for me. The only answer was, I'll pray for you.
Mhm. It,
And they just didn't know what to do with me, which I don't blame them. I probably wouldn't know either, if I was in their shoes.
yeah, I think in a lot of contexts that dynamic is very, very prevalent. I remember Bible college, um, different conversations, and I won't bring them up in specifics just for the sake of not diverging from your story, but just I remember thinking that's like people would have these complex emotional issues, and I remember just generically just getting this sense like some people just struggle to just feel safe in their own skin, or they're like, I'm so unhappy all the time and I don't know why. And the traditional answer was just always the gospel. Like there is some aspect in which you are not understanding or applying the gospel. The power of the gospel is the only thing you need for life and godliness. And I remember even reading, I went to Bible college to be a pastor, and we do have to take some counseling classes. Even if you're not trying to become a counselor professionally, you get counseling classes because you're going to do some kind of counseling as a pastor, maybe premarital or marriage counseling. And I remember reading a book from a Christian counselor who had written many books, on this topic about counseling, and he had come to some conclusion of like where he felt convicted as a conservative Christian that he was guiding people too much to these secular therapies. And he's like, I feel guilty even as a counselor. It's like I'm taking these church people who are saying I've got these wounds and these pains, and I'm pulling them away from the elders, away from the pastor, away from the sermons, away from the Bible studies, and I'm pulling them into my counseling sessions, and I'm encouraging them to read my counseling books. Some of them are directed to counselors how to counsel, but some are to lay people how to, understand, where you're at with life. And he's like, I'm encouraging people in all these directions. And he's like, I've become so convicted that I'm directing people away from the church. I need to stop that. And he said literally, like, I am going to start directing people away from counseling back to the pastor. You need to get back to the pastor, back to the gospel. And that was very, very strong in the teaching that I got in Bible colleges, Lancaster Bible College in central Pennsylvania. And just this sense of like, why would you go somewhere else when the gospel's where it's at? Like, there is no other power that could even come close to the power of the gospel. And if you are not thriving, it's not because you need more counseling, it's because you have not understood the gospel. There's something about you in your mind, in your application. You need to just go back to the gospel over and over. You understand the depth of your depravity, the intensity of the destruction and punishment you deserved, the gloriousness of the what Christ did in his death by dying and rising again, and your future hope of the you will someday be risen like Christ. He's the first fruits, but we'll be risen like Christ, and someday we will see God face to face, and he will make us like him. Like, if you understand that and apply it, like, what is there to be sad about? You've just won the biggest lottery of all time. You're going to heaven, for goodness sake. How can you be possibly sad? And it was like there was just no room for any understanding. And so when you do come to people who are like, I am a Christian, I do understand the gospel, but I'm still always sad. Or certainly, it's more prevalent now, but if someone were to say, I'm struggling with my sexual identity,
Mhm.
obviously, bring it back to God, repent of your unwillingness to do it God's way. And it just, if something's outside the standard box, Christians are by and large unequipped and unsure what to do with it. Because, like, if you're going to tell me that you understand the gospel and you're still struggling, what else can I do but say, go back again and again and again? And it's just like the cycle. Like we started with earlier, you punish yourself because you're like, well, if I'm not thriving and the gospel's where it's at, and I know the gospel, it's in my heart and my mind all the time, and yet I'm still struggling, then I got to go back. And it's like, you're pushing people right back to the emptiness of the God. And I said this many times in interviews. The experience that I and a lot of my interviewees have exposes the fact that the gospel is powerless. It doesn't do what people think it does. And there are some people that have these great stories where like, oh, I was an alcoholic, but I, heard a Billy Graham sermon and now I got off alcohol. Like, yes, there are stories where religion can give you a temporary fix and save you from some bad stuff. But in the end, you need to, I'm sorry, there's no outside savior. You have to learn to save yourself and you have to learn to heal. And it breaks my heart that I was I was thoroughly defending that perspective when I was in Bible college. I was very proud of, yes, you don't send people to this secular, psychology crap. You go to the gospel. The Bible is the sword that, rightly divides, and so forth. And God is it's talked about Romans 12, 1 and 2. I mean, that you will be renewed in your mind. And it's like, that's what the gospel does, is it renews you. And if you're not being renewed, then you must not be in the word enough. So it's like, get back to it. That's your square one. That's always your North Star. And looking back on it, it's like, what the hell were we thinking? Like, and not just that ideology is wrong, but Christians aren't equipped for psychology and counseling. Like, you can't look at a pastor and say in any way you're equipped to deal with mind heart issues. You're just not. You think you are. You're tricked at yourself, deceive yourself. But like, these people aren't equipped to deal with these topics. They're just not.
No, they're not. They think they are, though. Some of them think they are.
Yeah.
But some of them, know that they're not. And they are starting to, I think some pastors and churches are looking to therapists to help, but of course it has to be a Christian therapist. And my husband and I, we went to a Christian college. We got our therapist degrees from California Baptist University. So all our professors were Christian. And a lot of the internships were at churches that were creating counseling centers, professional counseling centers with licensed therapists, but they still have a Christian point of view. And the big problem with having a Christian point of view is that I don't know if they really can provide unconditional love, because in the Christian worldview, you're bad. Your nature is bad. Your natural nature is sinful. And in secure parenting and teaching, the difference between authoritarian parenting and secure parenting is you hold your child as good, naturally good, and you go from there. Like, your child is naturally good and doesn't need punishment and reward. Your child needs your presence and to encourage and learn how to self-reflect and learn about their emotions and their feelings, and teaching them how to manage them, and that they're good. All their feelings are good. And have a purpose. Whereas even like the Christian counselors, they hold to the basic principles of Christianity, which is your nature is bad. And you need God to save you from yourself. And in mind body therapies, you're right. We teach our clients and ourselves as therapists to save ourselves, to be there for ourselves, to love ourselves and accept ourselves, and get to know ourselves.
And with the sin part of it too, the being bad, there's so much shame attached to that too, that it's almost
Yeah.
like while you're trying to heal someone, you're adding to the pile because you're shaming them.
Yeah, that shame is it's horrible. We can't bear it. It's so horrible. It's such a horrible feeling. It's so scary, that, to think that you're not worthy of love. You're not worthy of belonging.
Mm,
And we pass that on to our kids unintentionally
yeah.
with the Christian worldview.
So you're saying being in therapy, that was the first time that you questioned this. What led it to become, um, how should I phrase it? Like the front and center concern of like, it's one thing to say this doesn't make sense, because I think, we all say that, life isn't making sense right now, or this feels, so frustrating. The pieces aren't fitting. But to go from that phase to, I don't know that the God I've been talking to is actually there. And this may be mythology, or whatever you phrase it as. Those can be very different experiences. How did you move to that? What's slowly started to move you to questioning the entire house of cards?
It was a long process. It took 8 years total.
Hmm.
But once I started questioning, I kept up my therapy and kept healing in therapy. Um, at one at some point, I decided to take a break from my Bible. That was a big move for me to say, every time I read my Bible, I beat myself up. It's not helping me. So I'm just gonna, and I know it's my fault, but I'm just gonna take a break. I'm not gonna read it for a while, and I'm just gonna focus on therapy. And when I get healed, then I'll go back, and I'm sure I'll understand the word better at that point. And it won't make me feel so bad and beat myself up all the time. And so what happened is I never opened it again, actually. And I stayed in therapy. My husband and I stopped going to church. We kind of made an excuse and said, well, we're having to meet with clients on Sunday mornings, so we're not going to be able, because we were really involved in this church. We were, really involved in helping and leading and all that,
Hmm.
ministry. So in like the couples, we would lead couples retreats, and we were doing therapy as trainees for people in the church. But yeah, we said, we can't go to church anymore because we have to meet with clients. It's kind of an excuse. And once I stopped reading my Bible, and then we stopped going to church, we were still Christians, but now I moved into this other phase. I call it my Oprah phase, where I believed in like the goodness of the universe and the energy of source, what Oprah Winfrey called source. I was a big fan of hers. I still am. I like Oprah.
Hmm.
Um,
That's like pure neo. I've never heard. Haven't watched her too much. I think probably the biggest I think I've seen of her is that Dan Barker interview when he and Laurie Gaylor met. But what you're describing there is like, sounds like pure Neoplatonism. It's crazy that she's like just packaging ancient Greek philosophy. They're returning to the
like there's
source. My
this good
goodness.
source in the universe. She mixes up Christianity, her childhood, her grandma was a Christian. I'm talking about Oprah right now.
Yeah.
So she mixes God with Christianity and the guide of the Bible, and also but more progressive
Yeah.
ideas but also she meditates, and she takes stuff from Buddhism and energy and source. And so I
Yeah.
went that route for a while, and
Did
I
that settle
learned how
well
to.
with you?
Hmm?
Did that settle well with you? Like, did you feel like that was for a while? Did it feel like that was the right path? And you'd finally kind of arrived at the right version of Christianity?
Yeah, it was I wasn't ready to say I was an atheist. I still hung on to this idea that there might be a God, and I'm pretty sure it's not the Christian God. I'm pretty sure it's not Jesus.
So you had
But
left at that point. You'd left a little bit at that point.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
interesting.
And I was learning a lot about the brain and neuroscience and the natural development of consciousness. And I started listening to Sam Harris. Somebody recommended him to me because he was into meditation, and I had started getting into mindfulness and meditation, and I still do practice mindfulness meditation. I meditate for my mental and emotional and physical health, not for anything, existential, spiritual or anything. But so somebody recommended to me to listen to Sam Harris, and that was my first introduction to atheism. And like, he's an atheist, and the science of the brain, how conscious, what happens when we die, what happens, these questions of consciousness, and is there life after death? Do we have a spirit, or what is consciousness? And he talks about a lot of he has opinions about a lot of these subject matters. And I got curious, and I for the first time I started hearing a more neuroscientific explanation for these, to me, had been mysteries or placed in the spiritual realm of, the unknown, like woo, something unknown. I don't know what it is, but it's a mystery. And then I started to think, well, maybe there is a natural explanation for stuff. I just haven't learned it yet. And there are natural explanations. Now, we may not know exactly how consciousness comes to be, but we're learning. And I was talking to my brother about it, and it's like, I don't believe in God, or I'm not an atheist because, how did we have consciousness? We don't have those answers. We will never have those answers, is what he said. And I said, well, you don't know that. If you believe that, then you're going to stop looking. If you believe that there are no answers to the consciousness question, then you're going to stop looking. But there are a lot of scientists that are still trying to figure that out, and we might figure it out one day.
Yeah, absolutely. Where was your husband with this? Was he questioning along with you, or was he fighting and staying a conservative Christian?
He was going along with me. He had actually started deconverting a lot slower and a lot earlier. My deconversion was pretty quick compared to his. So as I started to speak up about my doubts and my questions, he was like, oh yeah, that's right. He was like right there with me. And then
That's awesome.
agreeing with me, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess you were just faking it when I was a Christian. And he's like, well, I didn't want to cause problems, between us. And I knew how important it was to you. So
I'm more than a little jealous of that experience, by the way. My experience is very, very much not that. So
yeah. Well, we were much older too. I mean, I was in my 50s, so, and we'd been through a lot of disappointment in the church over and over again. And he had experienced a lot of his own disappointments and, praying, like, why doesn't God answer my prayers? You know, we've lived for 30 years praying for certain things and getting let down over and over and over again. And so for him, it was kind of that chipping away
Yeah.
of his faith like that, through these disappointments and fights within the church. We witnessed a lot of fighting in the church and a lot of hurt feelings, people wanting to sue. He was an attorney, he was a Christian attorney for 15 years. So the Christians that wanted to sue came to him because he was a Christian. So we witnessed a lot of the problems that a lot of people don't see
Hmm.
that get,
It's
covered over for the general membership of the church.
it's interesting because there's a there's a passage that talks about not taking your fellow Christians to court, because it's is it First Corinthians, Second Corinthians, one of the Corinthians, I think, but saying, why would you let pagans be your judges? Like the church can judge itself. It's got the word of God. It's an interesting conundrum, but it I totally can relate to that. And I think when I look at my deconversion, which happened, going on not quite 3 years ago, but I had spent the 2 years beforehand just digging into mythology and comparative mythology, the Greco-Roman mystery cults, digging very deep into the origins of the Yahweh character and so forth, studying everything from Philo and Plutarch to Apollonius of Tyana and all this stuff, just all the people that were part of the 100 BC to 100 to 200 AD, like who are the main characters and players of that time, and how could they have impacted the Jesus character. And that's what got me actually out. But looking back, once you get out, you're like, were there earlier seeds that were planted? And I would say one of them was very much what you're sharing about your husband, of just the disappointment. And I don't think it would have ever gotten me out enough, because I was so deeply entrenched in this idea of if you're disappointed with God, number one, be honest, he already knows. But number two, he's going to make this better than you could ever imagine. Kind of like that song, If I Could Only Imagine. But it was presented to me a lot in sermons as like a tapestry, where if someone's like doing a cross stitch, and when you look on the back side of the cross stitch, or the tapestry, it just looks like it's a bunch of random threads, and there's nothing pretty about it. And sometimes it's like a mess. But then when you flip it over and you see what the person was cross stitching, it's like, oh wow, you're painting a beautiful picture with these threads. And it was always, I had it, absolutely neck deep in my worldview, that if you could just, even for a minute, glimpse, number one, the character of God, but number two, what he's actually been doing in your life, what he's been protecting you from and moving you toward, all of your disappointments, all of your, God, why won't you answer me? And the tears of, God, I feel so alone, all that would dissipate in a moment. And you'd just be like, oh my dear God, thank you so much. I'm sorry I ever doubted you. Like, why did I ever doubt you? And kind of like Job, I place my hand over my mouth. I repent in dust and ashes.
Yeah.
I should have never, ever questioned your goodness. And it's, unfortunately, that was so deep that I could not use the disappointment with God and the lack of him talking to me as a reason to deconvert. I've heard people say it, or other people use the suffering, like how can God let 3-year-olds die of cancer? Those should have been enough, but to me, I had to dig into the mythology. But I still see the seeds, that they were part of my story in some sense. And it's very true. Like if you look back at it, you're like, there were questions that didn't make any sense. And it's kind of, to me, it reveals the insidious nature of it, where it's like you have like a circuit breaker, in your brain from Christianity, that says every time you say this is not making sense, there's a cognitive dissonance here. It's like, click, God's going to make it right in the end. Click, when you see what God's doing, you'll just all praise and glory to God. Thank you, God, even for the painful stuff. Thank you for the quiet seasons. Thank you for letting me wander in the wilderness, so to speak, for 40 years like Israel. You will bring me to the promised land. You will restore the years the locusts have eaten. And when you have those kind of circuit breakers that cut you off from thinking deeply about these topics, you can't escape, because You just know that you know that you know that you know that you're right, that the Bible is true, and that God will answer these questions, if not now, someday in heaven. And once you see his answers, everything will be made right, everything.
Yeah.
And you can't, if you don't ever get past that phase, you'll never truly question it. And that was
Yeah.
unfortunately where I was absolutely stuck in that hamster wheel.
Yeah. And, there's, it's an institution that knows what it's doing as far as the church goes. Like, you have to be there every Sunday. If you're a dedicated Christian, we could probably count on two hands how many Sundays we miss church. Because no matter what doubts you have during the week, you get yourself into church on Sunday, and you're with all the people and the emotion and the joy and the connection, and you're uplifted and you're good to go again. Your disappointments, your doubts, your questions, they go away because the church, they make sure you're there every Sunday, and they they know what works, to keep people there, keep people coming. They have those support groups during the week, the women's Bible study, um, the singing, the music, everything is designed to keep you coming back, so you don't question.
Yeah,
And
almost keep you sheltered from your own thinking, your own questioning.
Mhm,
I think
mhm.
on a related note, I think that's one reason that they bucked the system so much of trying to not, the church is not shutting down for coronavirus, because it's like, so many of these churches, they would be like, yeah, we'll shut down for 2 weeks or a month, but we're not shutting down for 6 months. And I think this
Yeah.
is the issue, is they knew that they would lose people if people
Mhm.
started to have a sense of, oh, I'm doing just fine without church. I'm actually doing
I
better without church.
I wonder, did the church lose people through the pandemic? Do you know if there's any statistics? I wonder if
I'm
they
not
did.
familiar with, I mean, I've talked to people that have said that it helped them to step away from the hive mentality. And, so anecdotally, I've heard people say it. I'm not sure what the actual numbers are, what people would, if they would attribute their deconversion, or at least, some kind of change to it or not.
Yeah,
But
I
no,
think
it's
that's
concerned me
true
that
too.
church.
And I
I'm
think
sorry.
also it's because of money. They
Yeah,
knew that they would lose money if they can't get the people in buildings.
yeah. I think it's a strong testimony, though, from people that maybe are on the fence, to see the church's unwillingness to be more concerned about people's lives over possibly getting sick and dying from the virus, as opposed to, like, you have to be in our service singing songs, in many of these churches, not even with masks on or whatever, just totally oblivious to health recommendations, and just to say, well, it is what it is, God will keep us safe. And it's like, I would suspect that some people, not just the issue of, well, I was away from church for a few months, so that helped me, but just seeing the way their pastors responded to it all, I would hope that some people were kind of disgusted by it and would have said, whether or not I being away from church affected me, the fact that you all are such jerks about public health is affecting me. Like, I don't want, you're not my people anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And um, I wonder if I would be a Trumpster if I hadn't deconverted, because most of my family are, and friends, Christian friends, they're I I wonder if I would have been if I hadn't deconverted, because that's the power of that, like you called it, the hive mentality, or that a group delusion that you're entrapped in that bubble,
Yeah.
and you just believe everything that you're told. And you're not trained to think for yourself. You're trained not to question, and to doubt, and to be suspicious of the world's wisdom, anything out of the church, uh, that's of, academia or science. That's you're told to be distrustful of it. Like, the church has their own scientists, and the church's scientists know that the church, the world is 6,000 years old, and there was a real flood, and there was a real Adam and Eve, because the church has their own scientists. They have their own science division.
Yeah.
So no need for anything outside of the church.
Amazing to think about. What was your family dynamic like as you were making these changes? How did your children respond to seeing you change? I mean, it sounds like eventually it was pretty, even if it took a while, it was eventually pretty divergent from where you all started from. How did they respond to it all?
They responded well. So what happened between me and my daughter, and my son, is I apologized. I went to therapy. There's like a whole nother story, part of my story, where my mom came to live with me, and I was her caregiver for 5 years before she died. And
Mm.
I became so triggered again, like I relapsed emotionally back into PTSD. And so I had to go to a wellness center for 4 weeks. And so while I was there in therapy, um, I started to feel bad about how I parented my kids and how I transferred all this trauma to them. And so my therapist encouraged me to apologize and to talk to them and open up a dialogue with them about what it was like for them to be parented by me. And so I did that, and it did open up some dialogue. So help them understand their struggles. Like, they have anxiety, they have depression, they have problems, emotional problems.
Mm.
So they were able to talk about that. And then I also started to help my daughter, who was a parent. She became a parent at a young age, and she divorced her husband and came to live with us when our granddaughter, her daughter, was like 1 year old. So she lived with us when her daughter was 1 to 3. And I was learning so much about the importance of parenting, and what went wrong with me, what went wrong with them. And I was able to help my daughter be present, teach her what I'd learned about what her daughter needs from her, what her daughter, how to be a better parent for her daughter than what she experienced with me. And that really helped us mend a lot of our own wounds between each other. And we became, we had created a better relationship in those 2 years.
Mm.
And she's
That's
taken,
awesome.
mhm. Yeah, and I write about her in my book. Um, she was divorced, but she had a boyfriend while she was living with us, and she was going to marry him. And but when she saw the change in me, and she said I could feel the change in you, that you were okay with who you were, that it somehow gave me, she's talking about herself, it somehow gave me the permission to be myself. And I knew that this marriage with her fiance at the time wasn't going to work.
Mm.
So doing all that healing work on me helped her gain some sense of self and independence to break off the relationship with, her fiance at the time. And that's when she moved out of the house. She eventually moved to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was curious with all that going on. I know you said it was like a very slow process,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm sure there were at some point, you would at least, even if it didn't hit you hard at individual points, there were probably points of reflection where you'd look back and say, wow, I no longer believe X, Y, Z. Um, did did it ever hit you hard in the sense of like, oh my gosh, I'm becoming secular, or I'm becoming an apostate, a heretic? Um, Questions like, what if what I'm doing is actually the devil grossly deceiving me? Or what if I'm just deceiving myself? And maybe, the worst question of all, what if I've just basically walked away from the Lord, and, assuming that there's a room in your theology at that point for you can be saved and lose it. Um, what if I've lost my salvation now? Like, what if I've truly put myself on the path to hell? And like, some people really struggle with, even nightmares about hell. Just the sense of like, I can't mentally believe that this is true, but emotionally, I just feel like there's gotta be true on some level. And people really struggle. A lot of people struggle with the idea of, if I'm wrong, and walking away from Christianity is the truly the worst choice ever, then I've made my life temporarily happier and eternally torturous. And I'm sacrificing the short term for a long term outcome that's horrible. And it sometimes, I think, takes people's breath away when they realize how afraid they are. Like, and the whole Pascal's wager, like, what if you're wrong? At the end of the day, what if you're truly wrong here? And did that ever hit you hard, or did it go so slowly that you could, like, the hits were just really gentle? And did you ever relapse and go back a little
Yeah,
bit?
that's an interesting question. No, it did not hit me because I think one, it was such a slow process. And what you're describing is my experience my whole life. My whole life, I was feeling that way. I was relapsing, or backsliding. And I was constantly scared of not being good enough. So this time I wasn't feeling scared. As I kept moving towards atheism or losing my faith, this time I started feeling more confident. With every month that went by, every breakthrough in therapy, every healing moment within me led me to more self-confidence, more self-love, more security, more inner security within me, so that I was building this security, this safe haven within me, and letting go of the security in heaven in Jesus, and this outside security that I was chasing after my whole life. So this time it was different. The feeling was different inside of me. I wasn't scared anymore. I was becoming more secure.
Hmm.
And the fear that you're describing happened after I completely deconverted and became an atheist, and really realized that this is it. This is my life. There is no afterlife. I want to live my life. That's when I started having panic attacks, because I developed a fear of dying.
Yep.
And I was like, oh man, what if I die? I mean, I was like, I just started to enjoy my life. And what if the plane crashes? And I'd be like, start having these panic attacks. So that's when I started having those panic attacks, those feelings. But it didn't happen until, and it wasn't a fear of hell. It was just a fear of like losing my consciousness, losing out on the life that I'm so excited to have now.
Hmm.
I really want to live my life here on earth.
Would you say that you would have wanted to live forever if you could have?
Now I'd like to live as long as I can.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know about forever. I don't know. I mean, I know they're working on it, extending aging or transferring consciousness somehow. I don't think that's possible yet, or I don't even know if it will ever be. I think we can start to extend our lifespan, not just with eating healthy and all that, but they are developing drugs and medicines that will extend our lifespan. And I'm all for that. Yeah.
Mhm.
But I don't think there's, no, I don't think, I mean, never say never. I mean, who knows what,
But I mean,
you know.
if there had been in a religious sense a way to have a way to live forever, would you have wanted to?
Yeah, I wanted to. I wanted to escape the suffering of this world. And I wasn't afraid of dying as a Christian. I wanted to go to heaven. I look forward to, I know some people thought it would sounded boring, but to me it sounded like safety. To me
Mm,
it sounded like, oh, I could go and be safe in heaven with Jesus. Yeah, I want that.
yeah. I've
Yeah.
had people challenge me on whether or not it makes sense to say I want to live forever, and I hear people's arguments, and it still to this day almost chokes me up. I wanted to live forever, and I still do. And
Mhm.
it's still painful to think about. I don't think I could ever be bored. I could look at a beautiful, if even if it was just God's going to put you on a beautiful island and you're just going to look at sunsets, sunrises and sunsets, and sit on the beach all day or whatever. Carve, whittle your wood, and plant a garden every day forever. I would have I would have delighted to do that. And to think that it's limited, and even at the end of our lives, it gets even like less pleasurable to live at that point. It's like we all don't have that many years when you think about this span of how long the earth and the universe has been here. It's like a blink of an eye. And I think the only thing that's really helped me, and this is not necessarily something I would recommend for people straight out of escaping, because it's hard to do this, but thinking through nihilism has really been a big deal for me. And to think, um, in my opinion, nothing we're doing here really ultimately matters. At some point, 3 or 4 generations even from now, no one's going to know our names. People aren't going to remember, what we did. I'm sad to think that, unless you or I become president or something, our names are going to be forgotten, and it just doesn't matter. But in some ways, that frees me up to say, okay, so the pressure's off. You don't have to be some superstar. You don't have to do everything you wanted to do. You don't have to have some bucket list, and if you don't get to it, man, your life was really awful. It's like, no, just you take every day as something to just be glad that you got another day, and just to say, I'm going to make today shine. And if I get tomorrow, I'll make it shine a little bit better. And eventually, hopefully, I'll have enough days, that cumulatively add up, that when my time is up, I'll be able to think, at my funeral, so to speak, to people look at my life and say, he left it better than he found it. He left this planet better. And, but to say it, in some ways it doesn't matter, but it's also, I get that strong feeling too of like the people that matter to me, like even though nothing matters in one sense, because there's no God, no afterlife. It's like, yeah, but even though it doesn't matter to any outside being, things matter to me. And
Mhm.
so I would look, for example, my kids and say, like, I want to live my life in a way that empowers them, like we talked about earlier, gives them
Mhm.
autonomy. And yes, does it ultimately matter in the big picture of a trillion years, whatever? No, but to me it matters. And to right now where I'm at, I'm going to be very present in my life, and that helps me a little bit. I think there's some people for whom that would be too depressing to go down the path of nihilism, but it is beginning to reshape my worldview and to help me to get a grasp on, like, stop trying to do everything and be everything to everybody, trying to be, make your life a success by this measure. Like, just, it doesn't matter. Like,
Right.
there's no goal that says you won. And there's no loss that says, oh, you lost. It's like you've just got to take, reshape your identity, and then decide for yourself, what do I think is going to make my life successful to me, and then go
Mhm.
do it if you can. And
Yeah.
anyway, I'm on my little soapbox here for my life,
I
but
agree. I agree. I'm along the same philosophy as you are, where you're at, and it's true. Nobody's going to remember me. maybe 2 generations. That's it. And think about, who do I remember? I remember my parents, but I don't remember my grandparents. So nobody's going to remember me, and it's okay. It's okay. What matters is that I'm happy, and I have to get over this idea that you know, living my life for myself is sinful or selfish. Because I don't believe that. I don't believe that anymore. I think it's good. It's good to live your life the way you want to live it, to be happy. And if you don't, if you don't want to, other than your kids, I think, we do have a responsibility for our family and our children. But I don't think that anybody has to sacrifice themselves for anybody if they don't want to.
Yeah.
And they can, and their lives are worthy. Their lives are just as worthy as somebody who sacrifices their life for others. Um, it's it's their choice, and it's okay. As long as you're not hurting anybody,
Yeah.
you're fine. And
And
you can enjoy. I mean, we're lucky. We're really lucky to be conscious beings in this day and age.
yeah. And in that sense, I do feel like when I look back at my deconversion, it's like you feel like you won the lottery. Like so many people, I mean, I'm sure all of us who've deconverted do this, but we see other people and think, why can't you see that this is not reality? Like, why can't you see that this is mythology? Why can't you see that this is not like blood magic and scapegoating and all this garbagey stuff? Like, and to them, it's as real as can be. It's as real as, everything else around us. It's like they really believe it. And I feel like even though it's depressing in one sense to land with, a nihilistic perspective, at the same time, I'm like, I still won the lottery. I would rather live knowing the truth of it all than be deceived. And I think you were alluding to that with, with the idea of like, you feel like you want to, at this point, live as long as you can to be like, I want to at least redeem the time I've got. And
Mhm.
a side note to that too, I think is the realizing that the afterlife isn't there, I think helps us to grieve better with the losses we face. Because it's like, instead of thinking, oh, I didn't really lose my parent, my dad didn't really die, 2 years ago. He's dead, but it's just his body that's dead. His spirit's alive, and I'll see him again soon. He's not really gone. And it's like you realize, oh shit, like they're gone. Like you're not going to see him again. And it helps you to grieve for real. Like the loss is not temporary, it's permanent and it's real. And
Yeah.
I feel like Christianity deprives people of the ability to heal correctly, because it's almost like don't worry about it. They're not really gone. They're just in the other room. You'll see them again soon. It's like, no, they're gone. And I feel so glad that I can, when I do see people pass away at this point, I can grieve it, fully, and say, this is a terrible loss to me. And I'm not going to see him again. No one's going to see him again,
Yeah.
and grieve the right way instead of
Mhm.
with these, tricks and deceptions.
Yeah, it comforts them to think, that they'll see them again. And but I think we do, live on in our minds, like our parents live on in our minds, in our memories. Um, and we are half their, their DNA is in us, in all
Yeah.
their cells, in our body. It's just that after 2 generations, then nobody's going to remember them. But I remember my parents. And
Yeah. The nice thing is too, we can hopefully make some big cultural shifts that even though they won't know our names, hopefully the ideas will make a difference.
mm,
I know I've kept you for, I did want to ask you just two last questions, then also maybe see if there's anything else you wanted to add that I didn't ask you about. So I certainly want you to feel free to, wrap us up the right way. But in terms of questions I had for you, the first one was, you mentioned sexuality. Did it feel like deconversion? I know that that's, the deconversion was not about trying to be, healed sexually. It was just about trying to get back to reality. But as a result of deconversion, did that, as a side effect, heal sexuality in any way for you?
Did it heal? It did. It healed the shame. I carried a lot of shame for feeling sexual, for enjoying, just an R-rated movie or something like that. I carried a lot of shame about that. I carried a lot of shame about my thoughts, and deconverting really helped heal that part of me, that
Hmm.
it's natural. I have a very open mind. I'm very open-minded now about sexuality, that it's a natural need. Um, it it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't have to remain within a marriage if it's consensual. Like, open marriage is, I have no judgment at all whatsoever. Polyamory. I have clients that are polyamorous. I have clients that, are gay or bisexual, and it just freed me up in a way that, I just opened me up to all kinds of possibilities without the moral judgment and the shame that I had attached to every other kind of sexuality other than male female within marriage. Now
Hmm.
it's like, oh, it's just something we made up. So
Yeah, it's just a
it,
construct.
yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, I would agree very much. And it's interesting too, the dynamic though, that very often those of us who are in these situations, you become mentally more sexually free, and unfortunately, because of your situation, you end up actually being able to express it less, and it's very much a frustration for the whole unequally yoked situations, where it's like, I'm ready more than ever to enjoy it, and you end up, you know, enjoying it less than ever because you're, whatever, deprived or whatever. But it's I'm going to hope the best for the viewers, that they can pursue it to the best of their ability, and for sure to begin to heal from some of that shame, because when you add up the modesty culture, virginity culture, shame culture, for sure, everyone for lusting, but guys especially, I feel like, would just deal with it so dramatically. If you masturbate or think about it, you're just such a bad person. It's as if, even Jesus says, if you've lusted after a woman in your heart, it's as bad as adultery. And and certainly, the whole culture of, if you have actually done something wrong, like, say a girl gets pregnant out of wedlock, like, you're really, you're a shame on the church. Like, you're the scarlet letter girl. And just to get past that and say, none of this ever mattered. Like, it just never mattered. And
Hmm.
I shouldn't have, like, I mean, we shouldn't have, I was going to say we should have known better, but we shouldn't have, because our community kept us so insulated against the truth. But like, once you get out, you're like, this whole stuff, it's just baggage. And I remember in, I think it's Philippians 3 or 4, Paul Paul does this list where he talks about pros and cons. He says, I was, a Jew, I was a Pharisee of Pharisees, I was this, that, and he just goes through all these things that you would list out as, like, this makes you super righteous and excellent as a God-fearing man, as a leader in the church, or the like, religious community. And then he contrasts it, and he says, but this was all basically leading me to be too proud. I was trusting in my own righteousness, as opposed to the righteousness that's freely given from God. And so he says, all this list of these positives, they were so good, they actually should go in the liability column. They're not good because they kept you from Christ. And I feel like, in a very similar way, it's like, all these religious dynamics that we get from Christianity, they felt at the time like, we're so proud of ourselves. We're so proud of doing it the right way. Some of us did do it right. We didn't have sex before marriage, and we didn't do this, and we gave our tithing or whatever, and you gave to missions, and you sang the songs, and you raised your hands. Like, I'm so proud of myself. And yet when you escape, it's like, these were liabilities. These were all ways to keep yourself self-deceived. And to realize this, if you want to actually truly spend any of your life in reality, you have to let that stuff go, like you really do. And I shudder, honestly, and I feel bad. I hope this doesn't offend people, but I shudder at the people that try to redeem this stuff through ultra liberal Christianity, where it's like, you know, try to say the Bible, for example, they say, oh, the Bible's not against homosexuals, and God isn't against women pastors. I'm sorry, bullshit. It is. Like, the Bible is against homosexuals. It is against women pastors. And just by kind of schmoozing the Bible into this really soft Christianity, like, you're not saving this thing. Like, you need to walk away from the mythology, or you'll never, ever really be able to truly live your life, because you always got this construct of, I'm responsible to this deity on some level. If he's there and he's created me and I'm the created being, then he's got some design. And I need to, if I buck his design, I'm basically doing something to mess up my life. And I don't, I've got some dear friends that are liberal Christians, and I respect them in one sense. I know why they go that route, but I'm hopeful that it's more like a train ride, where it's like, that's the next to last stop on the way to atheism, and you have to get to that stop to get to the next
Yeah.
one. But
It could very well be, because that was my route.
yeah.
That was my route, yeah, to liberal, to source, to finally atheist, yeah.
Mm. Mine was
Little
like
by little.
pure, it was just like, I was in it, and I guess I did all my grieving beforehand, but I
Mhm.
got right up to the edge of it, and it literally just it just came flooding in a day. Like, it was more like an hour, and everything I've been studying for 2 years or so, it just, in a minute, it clicked. I was like, shit, this isn't real. None of it's ever been real. And I
Yeah,
wouldn't have said that like 2 hours earlier, but
yeah,
the hour that it clicked, I was gone, completely out. But anyway, everybody's journey is
yeah.
different. It's a good thing.
Well, I did kind of have a moment like that, because I I think I heard from Sam Harris, or I read somewhere about, make a list of things, all things supernatural that you can think of, everything supernatural that you can think of, and then go one by one and see if you, and ask yourself, do I believe in this? Do I believe in this? Do I believe in angels? No. Do I believe in Santa Claus? No. Do I believe in dragons? No. Do I believe every single thing? And I went through the whole list and I was like, I'm an atheist.
Hmm.
I'm an atheist. I don't believe, do I believe in a soul? That's a biggie. Do I believe in a soul? No. Okay, then
Hmm.
I'm an atheist. So I did have kind of that moment where I went through logically, kind of, a list, made a list, and asked myself that question. If I don't believe in anything supernatural, then I'm an atheist.
Yeah, that's a good way to approach it. With the whole soul thing, I think I came about it a much more convoluted way. But
Uh-huh.
when I deconverted, one of the things that hit me very quickly was that there were things I'd been fighting as a Christian that suddenly I realized were probably true. And one of them was evolution. Evolution as a Christian was anathema. It was the stupidest thing ever. Um, but as soon as I deconverted, I was like, maybe, yeah, that actually probably is what happened, because I've got no other explanation now for how did we get from, the whatever we understand so far of the origins of the universe, to all the way to all the animals and all the the different things that we see in the fossil record and so forth. How do we get to where we are today as humans? Evolution probably was part of the process. And as soon as that hit me, one of the side thoughts I thought was, well, I'm now believing that I don't get a heaven, but it would also make sense that if we came from the other, if we're primates and there's other primates, that the other versions of primates, I couldn't say that, like, 2 iterations earlier, they didn't go to heaven, but we get to go to heaven. And 2 iterations of, 5 iterations earlier of primates, they had a soul, but, or didn't have a soul, but we suddenly do. Like, where was the click, where it's suddenly like, your primates that are they're much more like, what we think of as apes or whatever. And suddenly, like, bam, you're humans. Like, no, it was a very, very slow process. So,
Mhm.
like, where are you going to differentiate? Like, what makes us so special all of a sudden that we get to go to heaven, but the Neanderthals didn't, or whatever? And things like that. It really started to click with me. Like, we're putting ourselves in a spot where we think we're the best end result of creation, which we're not. We're one piece, and probably what's going to
Yeah,
be a further evolution. And we're not more special. Just
yeah,
luck of the draw. I could have been born a frog.
yeah.
And it's like,
We're just really lucky.
yeah, it's very amazing. Anyway, I did want to ask you, and if you want to maybe add anything else you wanted to add to your story first, and then my last question, you can answer this first or second, was just, can you tell us real quick before we finish about your book, both about the one that you wrote already and what you're working on, just to give us a real quick summary of what's in there if we were to pick those up.
Okay, yeah. My first book is my story that I shared with you today, pretty much how I healed my childhood trauma. And then the deconversion story is one chapter in
Hmm.
there. And at the end of every chapter, I give exercises that you can practice to um, be so that you can start healing your own trauma. And that's the breaking the chains of transgenerational trauma. I also tell my parents' story, and then my story, and then my children's story, and how healing myself has broken that chain.
Hmm.
And now I can pass my healing forward instead of the trauma. So that's my first book. And then the one I'm working on now, Reparenting Yourself, it's the technique that I developed. I didn't develop it. I took it from all these different mind body techniques like brain spotting, EMDR, interfamily systems, and created and added it with the teachings of attachment theory parenting, how to raise a secure child, how to meet your own child's emotional needs, and then how to do that for yourself, how to um, reparent your inner child at a real deep level, not intellectually, but through the feelings in your body. Because we're born to attach, bond with our parents, and by the time we're 3 years old, we've attached and we have a pattern already established, the foundation already established of how we stay safe, how we, in other words, how we feel love and belonging. It's it's established. So it's established before we can talk. So if you're a toddler, you can't talk yet. So in order to reparent yourself at that deep level, you have to learn how to connect to your body, those procedural memories. And that's how to meet your emotional needs, learning how to meet your emotional needs. And that I'm working on now. So I'm hoping maybe by the end of this year, it might be published.
Hmm. That's awesome. I look forward to reading both of them. I've got the first book there, and I'm going to be reading that. I'd love to, do a follow up with you at some point once I get a chance to read it, and hopefully I can take some good notes and ask some, pointed questions specifically about your work in that book. But on that note, by the way, for everyone that hasn't already done so, I'll have some links beneath her video for Dorothy, so you can go look up her YouTube channel, her website, Amazon, get her book. But please do support her. I definitely appreciate you sharing those resources, and I'm going to be digging into those shortly myself. Before we wrap up, was there any other parts of your story or any other thoughts in your mind that you wanted to add before we say goodnight?
No, I think I'm talked out.
Yeah,
It
it's been
was
a
fun though.
long interview. Well, thank you so much. This has been great to get to hear your story. Everyone, we've been speaking with Dorothy Husen. Dorothy, thank you so much. It's been great to hear the details, and so glad you were able to escape, most importantly. the Bible prison and gets healed in so many ways. And I love that you're turning it out. And so many people, they find some way, they know that this was so bad and that they want to give other people something better, and they find some method, some means, or some platform to turn the bad into good. And I love that you're doing that through your books and through your online courses and your therapy that you do. So thank you so much for what you're doing for the community. It's awesome.
Thanks. Thank you for what you do too. I'm a big fan of your channel, and I like listening to all the interviews that you do, all the different people that you interview.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's an awesome privilege. I love doing it. I can't wait. I'm hoping to, fingers crossed, at some point, quit my day job and just do this full time, and hopefully do 2 or 3 a week. But it's a definite privilege. I love hearing people's stories. Well, thank you so much, Dorothy. This has been great, and definitely let's do it again someday.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.